people don't care about what happens there, or they don't care about like orders from judges or any of that shit, because it's either on their team or it's corrupt. Like that's the only thing that they see. So having the physicality of Congress people being arrested, I think it's a much bigger thing than just more articles about another preliminary injunction or temporary restraining order or a court shooting. Like that's just like words on paper.
This is war. Take the gloves off. I mean, this is like, we've been critical of Democrats, and I've heard from about 6 Democrats, 1 senator, 5 representatives. And he says, well, what would you do? When we talk a little bit about messaging, he's like, and I'm like, but that's not enough. And he said, well, what do you want me to do? Walk down there and stop them? And I'm like, yeah, I'd like to see all, whatever it is, 48 or 49 U.S. senators and any Republicans that want to join. I'd like to see a couple hundred members of Congress go to the fucking building where this is and demand to go in and physically stop this and let them arrest you.
One thing that people have forgotten, and I don't know if it was like the soyification of our society or what, like people bitch about like arrests and everything so much. Like getting arrested is kind of the point of peaceful resistance. Like that's kind of what you want to happen. Like if you do, like in the MLK days and civil rights and all this, like if you do a huge protest, like no one's even getting arrested, that means you're fucking up. Now that doesn't mean you should be like arsoning people or assaulting people or, you know, doing like horrendously breaking the law, but like trying to get into a building that you have access to like this, I think 100% this would be a good thing to do. Although I do believe that, I think that there are congressmen that did go down. I don't know if they stayed until they got arrested or whatever, but I think that this would be like strong leadership. I think this would be good. Yeah.
I mean, fine. Let America see that there are still people who believe in...
Destiny, someone pointed out that if the Dems are there, Republicans are free to slam things through the House while they are in jail. I don't think the House works that way, no? Like, if half the Dems aren't there, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden you only need half as many votes to pass legislation, right?
Government in the U.S. and democracy. Let them arrest you. I mean, go down there. This guy I'm talking to is this representative, a newly elected guy, former service member. I'm like, dude, if someone attacked our shores, you put yourself in harm's way. I mean, march down to wherever this fucking building is, where all these acolytes and the High Sparrow are, and walk in there and demand they stop and let them arrest you. Democrats, this is not a time to come together.
What are you talking about? You literally read the article earlier, the stream of congressional lists being unable to get into the building for certain departments. Yeah, but I'm saying like stay and get arrested. These would be headlining stories that would force action. It would force us to fight on our terms. Now we're going to talk about, instead of Elon Musk and, you know, shitting out as much fake news as possible on X, now we can talk about our congressmen, our lawmakers are getting arrested. For what reason? Because they're not allowed into federal buildings that they have more right to be in than any retarded fucking Doge member? Like these would be good stories to be talking about, I think.
And let them arrest you. Democrats, this is not a time to come together. This is a time to come to the rescue. Get together, all of you, wherever the building is, wherever they're actually shutting off.
Well, they move very quickly is the problem. They don't quite know where they're going. Like they go from, they have the advantage here in that regard, is they can show up at various places and you don't know where they're showing up.
Well, we have very talented, smart people too with smartphones. I would create...
Yeah, you can do this very easily. That's a weak excuse. Like, just shoot us a text if something happens. Don't most of these people stay in D.C. or live in D.C. during session anyway? It's not like these people have to fly in from around the country.
A group of people, elected representatives, that go to these places where they are and say, I believe you are breaking the law. You are not an elected official. You need to leave this federal government building. And if the Capitol Police respect the law, if the Capitol Police show up at the order of the president and say, you need to vacate, I would not vacate. And if you get arrested, fine. I'm not a fan of breaking the law. I think the law is on our side here. I think these guys are breaking the law. And just because you have permission from the president, let's fight it out in court and find out, well, can the president break the law? Because as we have seen, the president has been stopped. Anytime this shit gets in front of a judge, it usually gets stopped.
Shut down, yeah.
So do you have the right as a citizen, an elected representative, or do you have the obligation to get in the way, legislative, verbally, legally, and quite frankly at this point, physically? I'm not suggesting violence. I'm not suggesting... These elected representatives have license to walk into any federal building. Millions of people have elected them. Find out where this shit is going on and go down there and say to these people, what you are doing is illegal.
I get it.
Elon Musk hired mercenaries to keep House Democrats out of the Department of Education. Are these like private police, or is that what the star shit is? Or is that the Doji symbol? Triple Canopy is an American, private security company and private military company that provides armed security mission support and risk management service to corporate. Blah, blah, blah. Wiki article written that it provides security services to government clients. How do you know that they weren't there before as part of contract? Seems like they've been hired by other departments for security purposes. Oh, so this is just fake news. Good job, dipshit.
The issue is, even when the judges stop them, though, they say, "Oh, we have security clearance," but no proof of it. Like this, they're persistent. Elon Musk has said to me,
"Move fast and break things."
Hey, everybody, I'm here with multiple.
I think this Florida. This Maxwell Frost. I was going to call him Scott Frost. Maxwell Frost. We've talked to this guy before. I think a couple times. He's a representative down here in Florida.
Hey, everybody, I'm here with multiple members of Congress. We're here to go to the Department of Education to fight for education, and they have locked the doors. They're not letting us in. It says all access entrance. There's this random guy out here who's refusing to let us in.
His name is
And
Jim
right here.
Harefield.
What's his name?
His name is Jim Harefield.
And right here, they have armed officers as well, acting like we're dangerous. A year ago, I'd be able to walk into this building and not be locked out. This is what they're doing. Elon is allowed in, but not you. Not your elected representatives, not parents, not students. Elon can go in, his goons can go in, but not the representatives of the people.
I wonder who gives orders to... It must be the DC National Guard? Is like the top of the chain for defense for these buildings? Or do each of these buildings have their own kind of like subunits that don't directly go through the National Guard? Like there's like the DC Capitol Police don't go through the National Guard. I have no idea. I don't know what the chain of command looks like for this.
exactly, that's correct. This is what they're doing. And, you know, like Elon Musk has said to me, we have self-driving in a year. We have self-driving in a year. We have security clearance. Anything, like one of them was like, how do you know they don't have it? I go, because their mouths are moving. They're lying. They lie as a practice in order to get to the next thing. They're high risk takers. They're willing to they know you're not going to stop them, that, you know, ultimately, because it takes effort. They don't want to govern. They want to break. And even though they're in charge of the government, they don't want to reform it. They want to break it. They want to destroy it. They want to take it down to its studs so that they can then rebuild in the way they see fit. And the arrogance of these people, I cannot tell you. You could like fuel a rocket to Mars with the arrogance of these people. And what's interesting is there's a bunch of lawsuits filed, as you said, as part of the counteroffensive. Unions, federal employees, and others are challenging the legality of Elon and Doge to get access to federal systems, destroy agencies, or push people out of jobs. I'm telling you, Elon also loves a legal fight, right? He doesn't care. He doesn't care. He waits people out. This is perfectly designed for someone like him, like to behave. And every one of his actions is very much the way he's behaved. That's one thing.
Also, always call it Doji. Don't call it Doge. Always Doji, okay?
You know, when I said he's not going to listen to that, he's going to go to the next one. And someone was like, how did you know? And then he did it. And I'm like, because this is his little act, right? This is his same thing every time. He's not particularly creative in new methods of this kind of stuff. But one of the things that's important to keep in mind is that he does have a pattern that he does all the time. And so do all these people, by the way. They all have the same pattern of making a mistake, whether it's for your teen girls and making them feel bad and going, we're so sorry, we're so sorry, we're so sorry, you know? And I think that's the one thing is not fully appreciated, that they're not sorry, nor will they pay attention to the law, even if a court orders, you know, right now.
Then what the fuck can happen? Can they sue? Let's get Mark Cuban to find us. The problem is, like, people don't care about legal shit, and people don't care about the corpse. Or, not the corpse, fuck. I just read some dumb thing. The courts. People don't care about what happens there or they don't care about like orders from judges or any of that shit, because it's either on their team or it's corrupt. Like that's the only thing that they see. So having the physicality of Congress people being arrested, I think it's a much bigger thing than just more articles about another preliminary injunction or temporary restraining order or a court shooting. Like that's just like words on paper. Like who cares? But seeing like, oh, that's my congressperson. They just got arrested. I think that mobilizes people and energizes them way more than the fucking random court shit.
Now, court orders Musk out of the Treasury computer payment system so it can sort out whether the Doge is a legal government entity. Are they out? They were in there before. Or, that's the whole thing. Is I don't know if they're actually, nobody knows if they're out. And then let me say the last thing. What they're going to do is find little cherry pick costs that look bad, right? And make things up because they just lie. They just lie.
Yeah, money laundering.
Or they're criminals. This thing about subscriptions at Politico, it was $24,000 at USAID. They were using their Politico Pro, just like you'd buy a subscription. And may I point out that Elon, the government pays Elon $15 billion. So everybody for his wares. And then it's petty and unbelievable nonsense. And they'll cherry pick stupid little things. A lot of them inaccurate, like the condoms to Gaza, for example. A lot of them deeply inaccurate or based on stories that are specious. So they'll keep doing that constantly so that we're like cats chasing a laser pointer.
But just moving to what we can do, the Democrats at this point, I remember talking to Ray Dalio about our elected officials, and he's like, and by the way, this is war. Take the gloves off. I mean, this isn't try to understand or empathize with the people who elected this guy.
People are saying, what about the courts? The problem you're running into is that whatever a court says, that's up to the executive to enforce. And it's very weird and strange when you're having to constantly take the executive to court when the executive has said that they're not playing by the rules anymore. So we're getting into scary territory where we're already in the territory where courts have issued, I think, TROs against some of this federal funding freezing stuff. And I don't know. I should keep track of these. Not the birthright citizenship thing, but the federal funding freeze stuff. Didn't that get blocked? But I don't know how much of this the executive is even listening to right now. So it's, if they just say fuck it, then who knows, right? A Trump-appointed judge just stayed the firing of 2,200 USAID employees a couple hours ago. Oh, okay. Judge blocks USAID firing. Oh, yeah, we heard about this earlier. But I don't know what this means. Like, are they still going to tell them to leave anyway? Or are they still going to freeze all these organizations anyway? Or, like, who knows? Yeah, I don't know. We'll see what happens, I guess. Judge in nation's capital extends block on Trump administration. Federal funding freeze. Oh, this is another one, yeah.
In my opinion, this is war, and they essentially they're challenging the Constitution and democracy. I don't think it's time for us to try and figure out, like, understand them. What I would say is, and I've heard from a lot of Canadians who appreciate our thoughts around the tariffs, and one person called me who Canada's actually strangely, like, there's like 12 families who kind of, I don't want to say run everything, but kind of own the majority of stuff. And I was talking, I'd like to think that America came to the aid of a lot of nations in real times of crisis over the last 100 years, and we want to keep doing that. At this point, I believe that nations need to come to the aid of America at this point. And I would suggest taking a page, and to the extent that people feel frustrated or worried about America no longer being the shining beacon leading democracies all over the world or setting the tone, what Canada did was I think you need to be very Machiavellian.
Oh, because I think Canada said they were going to start targeting, did they say that, or am I making that up? That they were going to target Republican, like, areas of commerce or whatever with their tariffs? Although now that's all been put on hold, so who knows?
Strategic. A province in Canada has canceled a $100 million contract for Starlink. They've said, we're just not going to continue to fund the lead of a coup.
Vote with your wallet.
I'd hit them where they're in their soft tissue, and that is if you think America plays and should continue to play a vital role in our democracy and be that shiny beacon on a hill, and you are using Starlink, or your government is in negotiations around subsidies, whatever it might be for EVs, or
who is actually responsible for checking the executive branch? I mean, like, it's checked by the other two branches of government. But at the end of the day, the executive is the one with the forces to actually carry out the rule of law. So theoretically, I mean, the executive branch is the one that could fuck over everybody. I mean, technically nothing, but I mean, you always have your enforcement branch. I guess it, like,
or Tesla, I would make it clear that you are not going to support an individual who's leading a coup in a nation that has, for the most part, been a really staunch ally. I'm now at the point where I can't call them Republicans. I think they are both kind of surprised and giddy that they're getting away with this, and also scared of crossing Elon for fear they'll be primaried by Twitter and his hundreds of millions of dollars, which he can do now, given the fact that we let one man amass $400 billion in power. Mm-hmm. And two, they're surprised. And also, quite frankly, Kara, I think Senator Murphy's fantastic. We come across as neutered and feckless at this point. We are like, look over here. Oh, I can't believe you would say it was DEI around a helicopter. Mm-hmm. You are exactly right. Yeah, that is a sideshow.
And may I say, the media is doing the same things.
I'm retarded. How are these federal judges blocking executive orders? Well, if an executive order goes out, if somebody in government does something that you think is violative of your right or is illegal, if you have standing, so you're an affected party, to bring a case, then what happens is you sue, and before the case goes through, or before you get to trial or anything like that, you can file motions beforehand. Something might be called you could file like a preliminary injunction or a temporary restraining order. And what'll happen is a judge will look at the case and he'll loosely evaluate the merits, and he'll figure if you're likely to succeed on the merits of this case, then you can grant a preliminary injunction, or you can grant a temporary restraining order or some type of stay. I think all three of those things are slightly different. So earlier in YouTube chat, Jen said that they had a stay on the firing of all those USAID employees. A stay just means you're going to do an action, but just wait a moment on that action. Just stay it. We're just going to wait for that action a little bit until this court case goes through. So that's how judges can block things. But they're blocking things are just them issuing an order saying don't do it. They don't actually go out like a judge. It's not like Judge Dredd. Judge Dredd can't go out and say we're going to sit here and stop you. You have to rely on the executive following the law, because they also enforce the law. So
these headlines in some of these papers, it's like innovative way to deal with government. I'm like, I said, it's a coup. Stop saying this. And one of the things that especially these young men that are working for them, they're so typical of the. One thing I did have as a theme in my book was the juvenilization of men, and the coddling of them, and persistent sidelining of women in Silicon Valley, and people of color or anybody that was different. And this is a 30 years going of this idea that these people have the right idea. And I found some stories that I wrote. One was called "The Men and No Women of Facebook," and "The Men and No Women of Boards." And one of the things
men and no women.
Called "The Men and No Women of Facebook," will have the right idea. And I found some stories that I wrote. One was called "The Men and No Women of Facebook,"
the Men and No Women
and the Men
of
and
Facebook?
No Women of Boards. And one of the things that was interesting is I was able to put those headlines because I controlled my own media. But one of the problems is that they have such disdain for people, and the press is treating it like it's like an equalized thing, and it's just not. I'm finding it so frustrating. I'm on CNN, and on Friday I was like, this is a hostile takeover. You need to treat it. Stop talking about DEI in the plane crash. You can talk, right? Stop. It's a hostile takeover of government, probably illegal. And you can't look at it like, well, look at that kind of things. I'm perplexed as to why it isn't a 5-alarm fire everywhere, all day long, every minute in the media.
No, your house is on fire. You shouldn't be arguing over the pattern of the couch. It just, and all of these things are important, but this really is, I think our elected representatives who have contacts overseas should be calling them and saying, you need to put pressure on Elon. And Trump is doing the same thing that Zuckerberg did to Sandberg. He's using him as this very powerful and effective heat shield, such that if he does go too far, and in fact they do find this is illegal, and Trump can back away and say, oh, I didn't know they had done that. Yeah, they went a little too far.
He's done that. Yeah, he's done that.
So he's basically, to a weird extent, Elon Musk is a $400 billion media platform weaponized Sandberg. He's a heat.
What is this? By the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and laws of the United States of America, it is hereby ordered, 1, The Second Amendment is an indispensable safeguard of security and liberty. Plan of action. Within 30 days of the date of this order, the Attorney General shall examine all orders, regulations, guidance, plans, international agreements, and other actions of executive departments and agencies to access or to assess any ongoing infringements of the Second Amendment rights of our citizens, and present a proposed plan of action to the President through the Domestic Policy Advisor to protect the Second Amendment rights of all Americans. What is it? Can't you just tell them to do this? Why do you need an EO? Can't you just like tell the ATF or whatever to re-examine shit? Do you need an executive order for that? Okay, I don't know. Whatever.
Heat shield. And he's like, you understand this technology and how to go in there and shut off payments. And what they're hoping is it resets or recalibrates the playing field for negotiation. Let's start from you're getting zero, despite the fact that our elected representatives passed this law that says Head Start is a good thing. And they went right to the mechanism for the payment. I mean, I don't understand. This is illegal. I would just, very simple. This is illegal, and I believe the people involved in this will be prosecuted. That is what I'm planning to do.
Won't be prosecuted by this Justice Department because all they're doing is getting rid of threatening companies that have DEI. That's the first thing Pam Bondi did.
Again, another weapon of mass distraction. That's not going to go anywhere. What could go somewhere, in my view, legally, is to say these are the laws, and I believe you and these 25-year-olds have broken, and I plan to do everything within my power to enforce these laws.
Now the only thing that can get in the way. Well, we're going to get to that. So let's go on a quick break really quickly. We'll talk about Trump, including flooding the zone, which we were just talking about. This is as much a marketing issue as anything else, and they're very good at this. Scott, we're back. President Trump is making all sorts of headlines this week. Trump surprised pretty much everyone with a plan for the U.S. to take over Gaza and turn it into a Middle East Riviera, Mara Gaza. That's the joke, which is not funny, actually. Though some administration officials are walking that back a bit. His cabinet nominees, RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, appear to be on their way to confirmation. He's reportedly getting closer to an executive order abolishing the Department of Education. He's doing everything by executive order because he doesn't want to bother with legislators. We talked a few weeks ago, questionable executive orders, let's say. Let's talk a little bit about this and how people can avoid falling the trap of distraction, Trump throwing up these crazy ideas and orders while Elon is making this power grab. It's quite coordinated from what I can tell, although I don't think Trump knows what he's doing. Courts have done a few things to keep them in check. They're stopping him from, he's already was in the Treasury. Now they're saying get out of the Treasury. Who knows if he will, because again, liars, all of them. A federal judge did block the birthright citizenship order this week. But then Trump was busy signing executive orders outlining plans for a government-run sovereign wealth fund, which would potentially use to buy TikTok. That's called state-run media. The fund would also support other national endeavors like infrastructure projects. I don't know what to say. Talk a little bit about this strategy as a marketing thing. I hate to say that, but and then we have a story in the New York Times. It's like, well, it's good that he's shaking up the difficult problem in the Mideast. Maybe it will create fresh ideas. Now,
I mean, that's true. It will create fresh ideas.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will.
Oh, Nancy Mace. Let's turn Gaza into Mar-a-Lago. Jesus.
I was sort of like, what? Like moving people against 2 million people against their will to where they've lived their whole lives is a fresh new idea. I mean, and as if no one, especially because Gaza is absolutely destroyed. Like, again, they destroyed it, and now they've destroyed it, they can't go back, that kind of thing.
Well, okay, but before we even get to the notion that Egypt, I mean, look at the borders. Look at the Gaza border with its neighboring nations. No one wants to take these refugees, whatever you want to call it. That is such a. I understand the argument. It's an interesting argument, and Dan Senor is a good person to talk to about this, or someone. The notion that we're setting up a situation where nothing's really going to be different, and eventually we're going to face the same problems in 2, 5, 10 years again. That's a powerful argument. So the notion that we need to be creative and thoughtful, fine. This is not the time. If you go into the emergency room, okay, the term "stop the bleeding" originates from a very logical place, and that is if you go into the emergency room with a gunshot, or you've fallen and hit your head and you're hemorrhaging blood, they don't take your PSA. They don't say check his or her cholesterol. They stop the bleeding. Everything else at this point is a worthy conversation that should be had by our elected representatives. But if we let a coup be successful and change the complexion of the negotiation, whereas opposed to arguing over who is prosecuted here and under what laws and how do we immediately arrest this coup, such that we're not negotiating, well, will you give us 50% of the funding back for Head Start, dear person who wasn't elected to make these decisions? Focus on stop the bleeding. And the bleeding here, America is bleeding out in a small building somewhere that has access, that is being remotely accessed by different locations, by a group of people under the cover of dark, to stop payments based on programs that were passed by laws by our elected representatives. This is a coup. And it's not a slow-moving coup, it's a fast-moving coup. And everything else is an ER doctor saying, okay, they lost their leg and they're going to be dead in 3 minutes if they continue to bleed out. But let's figure out Let's find out what their good and bad. Let's figure out their blood pressure. I mean, no, none of that's important at this point. Stop the bleeding. This is our focus.
Well, here's the problem.
Ketamine.
Ketamine, exactly. But this plan, literally, the Israeli defense minister said, is instruct the military to draft a plan to allow voluntary departure of Gaza from residents. The only way they're leaving is if you ethnically cleanse them. And I know
none of it makes any sense.
It's funny. Like one of the right. Most of the conservative think tanks are sort of like, oh dear. Like right now, if you look at some, they were like, no, this government thing isn't good. This Gaza thing isn't good. And they're like, don't be hysterical and use the term ethnic cleansing. But I'm like, only the comedy shows are getting it right. Like the Daily Show, they have different euphemisms for what it is, like, voluntary departure or refugee, moving them as refugees. And the word was password of the day is ethnic cleansing. And they keep doing different words and they go, bah, when they have the wrong word. Only the comedy shows are actually calling out this stuff for exactly what it is. Only the comedy shows are calling it a Nazi salute that Elon did, are saying this is illegal, are just explicitly doing it. And I guess it's under the cover of comedy because some of it's very funny, but it's actually quite strong, I guess. I don't know what else to say because that's where I'm seeing the best coverage of this stuff, or the best commentary, I guess.
Yeah, I just, look, again, I'm just remiss to engage in the conversation about how ridiculous it is because I don't think it's going to happen. I think this is, again, an attempt to say, look over here. Let me talk about gender in the workplace as I figure out a way to create algorithms for profit to make it more likely that your 15-year-old girl is going to engage in self-harm.
Right.
Look over here. I have a book signing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just...
the wealth fund thing. They wanted me to go and talk about the wealth fund. I said, that's fucking ridiculous. State-run media. It's not allowed. And they're like, well, what do you think it would be? I'm like, I don't. What do I think of the Loch Ness Monster? You're like asking me. It doesn't exist. Or maybe that does. But the wealth fund, I'm sort of like, state-run media. Does everyone have a problem with state-run media in the country with the First Amendment? Like, yeah, I do. Like other countries do have sovereign wealth funds that invest surplus income. The U.S., by the way, runs a budget deficit, so we don't even have money to put into the sovereign wealth fund. You understand sovereign wealth funds better than I do, but it's just nutty. Like, it's not to buy TikTok. What?
Look, a sovereign wealth, yeah. In the case, they play different roles. In the case of,
oh fuck me, I didn't even think of that. Oh, I'm fucking retarded. I feel like there's a world where a U.S. sovereign wealth fund would be cool, but if he's just literally talking about a sovereign wealth fund as a vehicle to acquire half of Twitter, or TikTok, that's actually fucking retarded. At what point are you willing to hold hands with the far left like Hassan to fight the right wing? Commies don't ever side with the liberals; they always side with the Nazis. I don't think that Hassan has any interest. I don't think that any of the commies have that much of an interest in uniquely fighting the current coup takeover of the government because they view liberals as just as bad. That's the issue. They're all the same type of enemy to them.
Kingdom, it's like we need to figure out a way to transition away from fossil fuels. We have a ton of money. We want to be strategic. We want to turn it. We want to turn it into a greater return. We want to be thoughtful about it, such that we can then make the investments we need to pivot away from an economy that's dependent upon a sea of oil, which is going to dry up in 30, 57 years, such that we entered the quote unquote modern world. In Norway, it's a means of saying, okay, Norway owns 1.5% of the world's stocks, and they create an incredible standard of living for their folks because they have thoughtful people trying to figure out how to invest. 1.5%. We entered the quote unquote modern world. In Norway, it's a means of saying, okay, Norway owns 1.5% of the world's stocks, and they create an incredible standard.
Damn, is that true? I didn't know that. Holy fuck. Is that true? Norway owns 1.5% of the world's stocks. Why do they hate liberals so much? Well, if you're a commie, you're an illiberal. You don't believe in liberal things, and liberals are like the status quo, so of course you hate them. Why would you hate the smaller parties that are trying to fight the liberals? You just hate the liberals.
Living for their folks because they have thoughtful people trying to figure out how to invest their excess capital at a greater ROI than their competition. America doesn't need a sovereign wealth fund. We have so much capital being invested privately. That's a financial argument. But the other thing is when you buy one firm, this is a sovereign wealth fund invests and tries to find alpha dislocation for the benefit of its citizens. We don't need that here. In addition, the sovereign wealth fund, again, is a distraction from what he's really suggesting, and that is the government owning a business, which is socialism.
Right.
And
a media business. It's not like it's potatoes or something.
Yeah.
But the UK made a very compelling argument at the time. I see why they probably thought that we need manufacturing to come back. And we have this really compelling guy who built the Pontiac GTO, and we're going to bring manufacturing. We have an opportunity here to be one of the largest shareholders in this amazing new technology and manufacturing brand called DeLorean. And so they made him. I believe that the critics of Republicans were right to criticize Obama for some of his subsidies around solar firms. The whole Republican argument is that the public sector shouldn't be in the business of picking winners and losers. I kind of get that. Now, if you're going to do it systemically and say we want to support companies who are building our chips for defense reasons, fine. But this is the state controlling the means of production. And even saying this, I'm taking the debate. This is never going to happen.
I don't know how I've never discovered these guys. I listened to one thing of these guys on an airplane, and they like spoke to my soul. Like, this guy sounds like a strong capitalist, but he's like pretty far to the left, and he like hates everything that's happening with the Trump shit. Same thing with Carrot. Like, these guys don't pull any punches. Like,
but again, I go back to where we're bleeding.
Right.
So this again is another distraction. It's a stupid idea. It will never happen. They know it, in my opinion. Maybe he just thought about it and thought, I'm a deal guy. I can make money here for the government. No, we don't want to own TikTok. We want to regulate it or ban it. We want to promote the rule of fair play and even playing field, such that startups have a shot and everyone is playing under the same rules. And meanwhile, if you, in fact, have an algorithm that can be reverse engineered to polarization, radicalization, or self-harm among teens, maybe you should be subject to the same liability as traditional media. Okay, that's the government's role. The government's role isn't to start cosplaying business. Trump has been cosplaying business his whole life. This is the reality of Trump. If he had invested his father's massive fortune,
he'd be wealthier than he is now. Yeah, his brand is his brand. It doesn't actually represent anything. Nobody likes Trump products or Trump things. The brand is literally just the brand itself.
which he inherited. In any index fund, he'd have more money than he has now. But he's been cosplaying business. He was hugely insecure. I ran across Trump businesses all the time doing business. And the general reputation of Trump and his family was they were a bunch of rich kids who didn't know what they were doing. That they just weren't very good at what they did. He's been cosplaying business his entire life.
Absolutely.
And this is, again, him thinking, I've got an idea. We'll own TikTok and we'll make money. That is not a government role. It's
Absolutely not.
And again, here I am taking the bait.
Yeah.
Look over here.
Even talking about this.
It's just such it's fucking nonsense. Like nonsense. Every time they ask me to comment on things, I'm like, it's nonsense. What else can I say? This is bullshit. This is such. There's no interest. Like sometimes I think it is good. Like let's think of some fresh ideas, right? What should we do here with this? How do we protect our?
This was her on Peers, where like you can tell that she's like, why? What are we talking about? This is like cringe as fuck. Like why are we?
National security and yet protect the First Amendment. Like, how do we do that? Like, there's always a room, and that's the good part of Silicon Valley. Like, let's think of new ways to do things. And by the way, they don't have. Let me just say, this attack. I'm going to just have one slight rant here. I got contacted by Bijan Sabat. Do you know him? He's a great investor. He was in Twitter early and stuff like that. And he's written a piece called. There are people in Silicon Valley that are not like this, just so you know. And he wrote a great piece called "Public Service: The Backbone of American Democracy." And he really didn't like this one line in these Doge press releases where he says the way to greater American prosperity is encouraging people to move from lower productivity jobs in the public sector to higher productivity jobs in the private sector. Reveals a staggering ignorance of the essential work performed by those in government. It is not only offensive, but also demonstrably false. I was so happy to read that, that the private, he would simply put the narrative that the private sector is inherently superior to the public sector does disservice to the millions of Americans who serve their country every day. It risks demoralizing a workforce already under strain and undermines the very institutions that protect and advance our shared values. These people who have had so many friggin' failures of their startups, they fuck up so much. And Donald Trump is the top fuck up of business. They're allowed to say they're innovative, and they then insult government officials who have done a pretty fucking good job keeping us safe every day. And it's so offensive and so easy.
Yeah, this goes back to, I don't remember who said it before. Yesterday we were listening to, like, government and private industry are different. They can afford different things in terms of like, Bill Gates, like their risk appetite is going to be different. Their risk tolerance is going to be different. Like government can't afford to fail. Private startups can afford to fail all the time. You start, you fail, who cares? Do another one. But it's a totally different risk model, right? To
insult the government and its workers. And they have fucked up so many times that we should start making lists of all the different stupidities they have perpetrated. I find the whole thing, it's nonsense. I don't know.
So there's also parsing kind of mendacious to just stupid and dangerous. The CIA, I've had the pleasure of working with several officers. These are incredibly bright people, incredibly skilled. And instead of going to work for Google or Procter & Gamble, they decide to serve their country, and they take enormous risks. And the fact that they have so little regard for our national security apparatus that they might be unmasking these folks, either recklessly, negligently, that is 100% the right word. It's traitorous, and it's stupid, because what is the likelihood? The Central Intelligence Agency recruits out of every top business school, every top college. They try and find the best and brightest from a very early age. Do you think you're more or less inclined to go to work for the Central Intelligence Agency right now, knowing that your own government might out you? What if you're overseas on assignment right now?
Yeah.
Oh, sleep well tonight.
This is what I'm saying too about, like, that's cool that I guess that a judge blocked the USAID thing, but now imagine you're one of these people, like, you're on the chopping block, Like imagine your manager comes around and they're just like, I'm firing you, and you. And then your supervisor's like, well, hold on, wait. There's like a whole process you got to do that. Like you can't just fire my employees for some reason or whatever, right? Well, how are your employees going to feel knowing that the manager is looking to get rid of them no matter what? Like, it's just not, it's fucked. This is just fucked.
They might know who I am and what I'm doing here. And by the way, it's not like these guys lose their pension if they're found out. It's not like they get fired. They are tortured and then murdered trying to protect our shores. And you have people who have so little regard for their sacrifice and their patriotism.
Let me just take one thing, we've got to move on, is someone who is very interesting, some of his comments is Bill Gates. He's on a book tour for a book called Source Code. He has met with Trump because he's trying to stop him from defunding AIDS things. And he has to do that. He's the president. He's got to go in there and make his argument. Why not? And he has been defending USAID. He's someone who was very arrogant about government. When I met him, he was super arrogant. He now is like, I was arrogant. And let me tell you, there's some amazing people working for the government. I've had government. There's dedicated, important people doing important work. If you partner with the government, he's very quietly doing the right messaging around why this is wrong. And every now and then he's like, what Elon's doing is nonsense and irresponsible. And here's why. I don't think I'd like him to yell more, but I have to say I was pretty surprised how explicit he is being. There's very few other leaders that are doing why this is wrong. Partner with the government, people working for the government. I've had government. There's dedicated, important people doing important work. If you partner with the government, people working very arrogant about government. When I met him, he was super arrogant. Why not? And he has been defending things. And he has to do that. He's the president. He's got to go in there and make his argument. Why not? And he has been defending USAID. He's someone who was source code. Let me just take one thing. We've got to move on. Is someone who is very interesting. Some of his comments is Bill Gates. He's on a book tour for a book called Source. What Elon's doing is nonsense and irresponsible. And here's why. I don't think I'd like him to yell more, but I have to say I was pretty surprised how explicit he is being. There's very few other leaders that are doing that. None of them. Like none of them. He was the only one.
Well, wait. Have we mentioned Mark Cuban? I feel like Mark Cuban has done a decent job. I don't know where he's been at recently, but I feel like Cuban's been out there. No.
Because he knows he doesn't have a price to pay because he's Bill Gates, right? So he can do that. So all you other rich fuckers who don't think this is right, not saying anything, is heinous on your behalf. Anyway, let's go on a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about this week's earnings. Scott, we're back with our second big story. There's lots of earnings news. We still have to talk about earnings. Disney beat expectations, reporting a 4.8% increase in revenue. The company's experience business, which includes parks, cruises, and resorts, rose 3%. Its entertainment division saw a 9% jump in revenue. Disney Plus saw a 1% decline in subscribers following an increase.
Is there any legit reason for why the right hates Bill Gates? I've always thought he was very smart, fair, and based. I think it probably all came during COVID and him supporting the vax and globalist shit.
In prices last year, they're doing pretty well. Their streaming business is quite stabilized and it's moving forward. At some point, you run out of subscribers, essentially, and there's a lot of churn, et cetera. Alphabet, I'm going to go through them, and then you can comment on them. Shares of the company are down almost 6% in the last 5 days at the time of the taping. Alphabet's overall revenue grew 12%, compared with 13% in the same quarter last year. Advertising revenue grew 10.6% compared to 11% last year. The company announced plans to invest in above expectations $75 billion in capital expenditures as it continues to build AI offerings. One of the things they did note is they're going to stop all their efforts in DEI, because they're going to, unlike Costco and Apple, they've decided to cave. And there are threats from Pam Bondi and state attorney generals, and they've just decided to cave in all their different programs. Non-Spotify shares are up 12% in the last 5 days at the time of the taping after the company reported its first profitable year. The company reported 40% gross profit growth year over year and operating income of 477 million euros. Monthly active users grew by 35 million, up 12% for the year. Lastly, Uber reported a lower than expected operating income of 770 million. 3.1 billion trips were completed on the platform, up 18% year over year. Uber also announced it's ramping up for a public launch of robo-taxis in Austin through its partnership with Waymo. Waymo is killing it in San Francisco, I can tell you that. Well, the company is optimistic about the autonomous vehicle market. Admit there are many, many years to scale. They're absolutely right. So which one of these would you like to take? They all did okay, I think. It was pretty good given all the...
Well, I'll touch on each of them and then try and extract what I think is an interesting theme. So Disney, essentially, the streaming wars, everyone's fighting to be lift. What do I mean by that? Netflix is running away with it.
Definitely.
So everyone's fighting for number two. And I don't want to say they've given up, but Netflix, I mean, just to give you a sense, in 2015, Disney price to sales was 4. Netflix was 5, so they saw them in kind of spitting distance of each other from shareholder standpoint. As we sit here today, Disney trades at 2 times revenue, and Netflix trades at 11 times revenue. Yep. Disney, they lost 700,000 subscribers, but that was in the face of a price increase. Now, it wasn't a huge price increase, but it does show kind of the strength of Disney's positioning around family. Whereas Netflix added 19 million subscribers, Disney Plus has added 13 million. The big thing comes down to churn, and that is there's this really uncomfortable dynamic where everyone but Netflix has to reinvent their entire customer base every 10 years or 2 years, because they go on and they download the entire season of Ted Lasso and then they cancel Apple TV Plus. And Netflix has so much gross tonnage that their churn is only 2%. Disney is number 2, but it's at 4.8%. And then the other guys have even higher churn rates. Let's moving on.
Can I just make a note here?
Yep.
Real competitor, and this is me talking to Hollywood people yesterday, is YouTube. YouTube
100%,
is the competitor
100%.
of Netflix. The real,
and no one talks about.
They are killing it at Netflix. So go on to Google and Alphabet.
But to your point, total share of video viewership is like 8 or 9% for Netflix. YouTube is 11.
Yeah.
YouTube, you could argue YouTube is the number 1 streamer, but it's still categorized as a different sector.
I think they're going to do a lot
Disney,
more originals, FYI. But go ahead.
Disney's parks, cruises, and resorts continues to be, the gift that keeps on giving. Revenue up 3%, but the operating income was up 6 to 8%. Disney's done a good job incorporating ESPN into a pretty compelling bundle with Hulu. Moving on to Google. Their full year revenue grew 14%, but people are freaked out about slower than expected cloud growth because they see that as a proxy for their AI offering. So they took the stock down a little bit. They're also worried about the amount of CapEx. Their capital expenditure is supposed to increase to $75 billion. The thing about Google, though, is that they have 5 separate businesses that do more than $30 billion in annual revenue. If their stock were to go down, I mean, look at it this way. That's like saying they have the revenue power of 5 different Starbucks or 5 different Visas with different businesses. They are just a series of cash volcanoes. 7 products and platforms with over 2 billion users. Search, Maps, Gmail, Android. They're just doing incredibly. Spotify is probably the most impressive performer from where it was, say, 12 or 24 months ago, and that is they essentially set quarterly record highs for revenue, gross margin, operating income. The stock has tripled in the last year. Their platform growth is accelerating. Their total monthly active users hit 675 million. Their premium subscribers up 11%. Their average revenue per user, or ARPU, is up 5%. And now kind of what I'll say, and I'll come back to it in a second, but the big theme here, or something hopefully resembling insight, is the following. If you look at the acceleration in Spotify stock and in Netflix, I believe that that's more than just growth in the category. It's effectively, so Netflix now has more than 50% of its production overseas. And if you look at Spotify, less than 1% of its artists garner more than 92% of its streaming revenues. Effectively, with the scale that these companies have, and by not sharing analytics or information, what Netflix has done is it has transferred a massive amount of capital, earnings power, money from the means of production, specifically artists, to Netflix shareholders. And that is, when you put something on Netflix, they don't tell you how successful it is. They might produce it in Spain or in Seoul, but they basically extracted a shit ton of capital from California-based employees, from actors, from producers, and said, we're kind of the big dog here, and you have to operate under this new religion or this new operating model. Because, by the way,
What the fuck does this have to do with anything? Well, they cover a variety of news. Damn, what do you mean? What does this have to do with anything? Apparently, part of what they do is they cover business shit. And this guy actually knows apparently how businesses work and can talk about the stock market. He's not a random fucking retard. So it's part of what they cover on their news thing. What?
if you don't want to be in our Netflix drama, there's 179,000 other SAG-AFTRA people that are looking for work.
And can I just make a point? They also put out so much content that's pretty good, right? It's not, none of it's really one of the way. Someone was telling me a story who was with last night, who used to work at Google, with Susan Wojcicki, the late Susan Wojcicki, and they were thinking about getting into originals, and they walked her through the economics of Hollywood because she wasn't familiar. You know, she'd been very successful at Google and she'd just taken over YouTube, and they walked her through it, and she got up and she goes, "This isn't a business. Like, what? Only one hit carries all the losses." Like, she immediately clocked the problem, right? Like, she goes, "This isn't a really sustainable business if you don't have this one hit." And she goes, "Why are they operating like this?" And I think she had insight into the idea that if you had a lot of little hits or spread it out with stuff that people like, you would do a lot better. And that's what Netflix has kind of done here. They have every now and then they have a big one, but all the others are fine. And they help sustain the fact that it's a good product. You find efficacy in the product. You find pleasure in the product. Same thing with Spotify. At its heart, it's a good product. I don't know what else.
It seems insane to me to say we are in a crisis, we're in a coup. Okay, now onto our normally scheduled stock segment. It's not just stock. What do you mean? They're talking earnings for these three companies came out. These companies are culturally significant and financially significant, and they probably even rattle our job markets a little bit and our entire industries. Do you think it's totally irrelevant what's going on with Disney, Google, and Spotify? I feel like Jesus Christ, you guys are so one track or so boring, one dimensional. I can only talk about this one fucking Jesus, chill. And while you do that, let me grab my iPad. Hold on.
To say it's enjoyable to use. You find what you want. Maybe it's not soaring like an HBO can be sometime, but every now and then it is. And it's it's a good. I don't know what else to say. It's a good product. That's how I feel about both those companies.
But you touched on what the secret. There's two ingredients of the secret sauce here, and it's an asymmetry. They both have to do with an asymmetry of information. If Deadpool does $1.3 billion, the agent for Ryan Reynolds and for Hugh Jackman know that, and the next time they want to do Deadpool meets Fast and Furious 18 or whatever, the agent from WME goes to the studio and says, "I know how important Hugh Jackman is," and they extract a shit ton of pound of flesh. In streaming, the only evidence that Ben Stiller has that Severance got more than one viewer is they order seasons 3 and 4. So the asymmetry of information always benefits the person that has symmetrical information. When Jennifer Aniston's agent knew that the Thursday night lineup depended, was resting on the pillar of Friends, the people producing and acting in Friends could extract a lot of revenue. No one in streaming has any fucking idea. And then the second big number out of the Disney earnings that fascinated me and explains why Netflix trades at 11 times revenue and Disney at 2 times, is that now more than half of Netflix's content budget is spent overseas. And some of it's done to be more multinational, but the majority of the reason they do it, and the reason why they're building big studios in New Jersey, is because New Jersey just supersized their tax subsidy. They realize if we can produce 2 8s in Spain or Seoul, instead of producing one possible 8 or 9 in LA, go with the 8s overseas. Over 50% of their content budget is now spent overseas. Do you know what percentage of Disney's content budget is spent overseas?
I bet none.
12%.
4%.
Right, none. None.
So what Japan did to Detroit, Netflix is doing to Los Angeles. And I don't care. You want to talk about nuclear code secrets? When we launch our series on Netflix, and if I call them and say, I'm not working with you again unless you tell me how many people downloaded this relative to your other dramas, they're going to say, well, it's nice working with this guy. Because they don't want anyone to have that leverage. So asymmetry of information and the globalization of content production.
And a decent product, a decent, pleasurable product.
Oh, it's a fantastic product. But all of those benefits, this is a straight line. There's a lot of innovation, a fantastic product. But you want to talk about a massive flow to the bottom line and who it's coming from beyond the natural growth, organic growth of the sector. It's coming from the gaffer, the lighting guy, and the woman who wrote season 4 of SpongeBob SquarePants and used to make $200,000 a year. And Netflix has said, I figured out a way to pay you $40,000. And all of that capital coming out of high production states and people has moved to Netflix shareholders. And it represents a much broader trend in our society, and that is the notion that we give a shit about stakeholders, not shareholders, is just not true. Everything is run for shareholders. And by the way, there's some upside to that. I'm not arguing that it's the wrong way, but be clear, folks. Everything is now optimized to transfer as much capital as possible from states, from workers. The workers here are not being prioritized. Production in Los Angeles was off 40% year on year, not because they're not talented, but because they're too goddamn expensive. And Netflix has found a way to keep them in the dark and then hire 80% as talented a person overseas for 30 to 40% of the price. It's a transfer of wealth from artists at Spotify.
Destiny, wasn't the thesis of their earlier part that we cannot engage with these distractions? Isn't that actively advocating for one-track mind in the current climate? What? No. When they said we can't engage with these distractions, they're saying that when you're talking about what's going on with government, don't engage with the distractions of what was the retarded executive order that Donald Trump signed, or what is the stupid thing that Elon Musk is tweeting about. They didn't say that you should engage with anything else ever in your entire life except for these political stories. Like,